Well, to discuss the National Broadband Network and climate change policy, the Shadow Minister for Communications and Broadband, Malcolm Turnbull, joined me just a short time ago from Maroochydore. Malcolm Turnbull, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
On the NBN, Joe Hockey said today the government's rolling out a Bentley when all we need is a Commodore. Is he saying the NBN is actually too good, too luxurious for Australian families?
I think what Joe is saying that it is much more expensive than we need to have in order to get the job done. And the job that needs to be done is to ensure that all Australians have fast broadband at an affordable price. And the government is spending vastly more money, much more money than you need in order to achieve that objective. They are doing extraordinary things. You've got the HFC network, the hybrid fibre coax network, which passes 30% of Australian homes and is capable of running at 100 megabits per second, and in fact in Melbourne it already is. But the government is going to render that obsolete and say that it cannot be used for broadband and overbuild it with the NBN. There are other parts of Australia where fibre to the node would be a much more efficient, cost-effective solution and deliver fast broadband at a much lower cost, but the government's declining to do that too. So this is, Tony, the consequence of them not having done their homework. If they had done, as they should have done, a rigorous cost-benefit analysis at the outset and asked the question, what is the fastest and most cost-effective way in terms of taxpayer dollar expenditure to deliver fast broadband to all Australians? If they'd done that homework first, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing now. OK,
the independent MP, Tony Windsor, was at the opening of the Armidale NBN system, and he says it's time we got over this thing, that the NBN is going to be too dear, that regional Australia is going to be the major beneficiary of this network, and he's obviously hugely supportive of it.
Well, he is, and I'm sure the 7 people that were connected to it at the time they opened it today would all be appreciative, but many people would be puzzled why the NBN presently has more employees than it has paying customers.
Well, in this case, I'll just bring you up on that figure, though, because 87% of the homes and businesses in that area did elect to be connected to the NBN. So I suppose it's hard to judge on day one how many will ultimately take it up. But you want them to take it up, wouldn't you? I mean, you're a great proponent of the internet. You'd want fast, high-speed broadband to be taken up by vast numbers of people, wouldn't you?
Well, I certainly do, and this is the point, Tony, that there are great benefits to be had from broadband being widely available. And, of course, it is widely available in Australia. It's just not universally available. Most Australians do have access to fast broadband now, but everyone should have access to it, and there are great benefits from that. But the benefit comes from having fast broadband. It doesn't come from having fibre to the home. You see, the thing that we've got to remember about these telecommunications networks is that the vast bulk of the cost, 75% or more, is taken up with the civil works, with the backhoes, with the trenching, with the digging, with the drilling, with the guys with trucks and bulldozers and cherry pickers. All of that civil construction work is the bulk of the cost. And so what people do in countries where they're being smarter about this deployment is try to use as much as possible, without compromising the broadband objective, the existing telecommunications network. So in Korea, South Korea, which is always held up as being the great role model in terms of broadband technology, they do not run fibre into every apartment, not at all. They have, in effect, fibre to the node. And to my surprise, I have to say, when I was visiting there recently, in new residential developments, massive new residential developments, they're not even running fibre into every apartment there. They're running Cat5 cable, which is in effect another copper version of copper network.
So at what point does it become impossible for a future coalition government to scrap the NBN, to stop it in its tracks and to wind back the contracts?
Well, I think you'd have to ask the question, at what point is it possible to stop distinguished interviewers like you saying we're planning to scrap the NBN or stop it in its tracks? I don't want to scrap the NBN. I don't want to stop it in its tracks. What I want to do is ensure that all Australians have access to fast broadband at an affordable price. In practical terms, that would mean if we got into government tomorrow, or indeed in 2 years, we will do the cost-benefit analysis, which I'm sure will recommend that there be a variety of technologies deployed, that where it's economical and technically feasible, existing networks are used, as long as it doesn't compromise the broadband objective, and you would get a system, a network that is agnostic from a technology point of view.
OK, let's move on to another subject. It was reported today that the main coal-fired power generators in Australia expect to continue their operations well into the 2030s, so another 20 years or more. Do you believe that coal-fired power needs to be phased out in Australia in order to reduce emissions?
Well, there is no way that you can reduce your emissions from energy generation without a fuel switch from brown coal to black coal to gas, and a combination of those. There are other ways of cutting emissions. Obviously, people can use energy more efficiently, so less energy has to be generated in the first place, and you can also
all right,
buy
I'll just stick with that point. Can I just stick with that point, though, because I think you basically are saying that you have to phase out or change the energy source of the main energy source.
You've got to fuel switch, yeah.
How would a coalition government do that when there's no disincentive to continuing the high levels of greenhouse emissions built into your policy?
Well, the coalition, as you know, no longer supports an emissions trading scheme or what you would call a market-based mechanism for putting a price on carbon. The coalition's policy, as laid out by Tony Abbott and Greg Hunt, involves spending taxpayers' money taken out of the budget, so many billions of dollars, to pay.
Do you know how many billions of dollars, by the way? Is it clear?
Well, there's a budget set out for that, and I'll leave Greg Hunt to identify it, but it is certainly a multi-billion-dollar exercise. But the way it works is that the taxpayer's money would be used to buy carbon offsets from farmers, so that as industry pollutes, the government would then spend taxpayers' dollars to buy carbon offsets to offset that pollution at the same time. So that's one part of it. So the taxpayer would fund.
Well, can I just stick with that part of it? That's the principal part. Can I stick with that for a moment? Is that direct action policy, that aspect of it, is that a market-based mechanism?
Well, you could say it is, in the sense that there would be a competition for farmers and landowners to provide the cheapest abatement, but it's not a market-based mechanism in the way that an emissions trading scheme is,
because much of your speech, if I can just take you back to the 8th of February last year, much of your speech was devoted to the argument that it's not a market-based mechanism. You've just repeated that, but rather a recipe for fiscal recklessness on a grand scale. And if it was fiscally reckless back at the beginning of last year, is it still fiscally reckless?
Well, look, I won't repeat the speech I gave. That was a very, that was a tough moment when I crossed the floor. In the Liberal Party, we respect the right of members to cross the floor, but it's not a right that I'd ever exercised before, and I don't anticipate exercising it again. But I have to say to you, Tony, that that was very difficult, but you've got to remember this.
Well, no, but I'd like to. Can I just ask you to remember what you said, since you said this?
No, I remember.
You can't rewrite history. You can't unsay what you said. No, I've always believed the Liberals reject the idea that governments know best. Schemes where bureaucrats and politicians pick technologies and winners. Doling out billions of taxpayers' money is neither economically efficient nor will it be environmentally effective. That was your assessment of the, as I understand it, of the Liberals' direct action policy back then. Is it still your assessment?
Well, Tony, honestly, I don't want to comment on on the direct action policy. I'm happy to describe it to you. If you want it, a commentary run on it, you should ask Tony Abbott or Greg Hunt about it. It is what it is. It is a policy where, yes, the government does pick winners. There's no doubt about that. Where the government does spend taxpayers' money to pay for investments to offset the emissions by industry. That's the And the virtue of that, I think there are two virtues of that from the point of view of Mr Abbott and Mr Hunt. One is that it can be easily terminated if, in fact, climate change is proved to be not real, which some people obviously believe. I don't. If you believe climate change is going to be proved to be unreal, then a scheme like that can be brought to an end. And also, on the other hand, if you believe...
So this is a scheme which actually is built, effectively, to cater for skeptics.
Well, I think let me just go on. Or if you believe that there is not going to be any global action and that the rest of the world will just say it's all too hard and we'll just, let the planet get hotter and hotter and, heaven help our future generations. If you take that rather grim, fatalistic view of the future and you want to abandon all activity, a scheme like that is easier to stop. Now, I think those are arguments that some of the supporters of the scheme take, but it obviously, if you want to have a long-term solution to abating carbon emissions and to achieve, if you want to have a long-term technique of cutting carbon emissions, in a very substantial way to the levels that the scientists are telling us we need to do by mid-century to avoid dangerous climate change, then a direct action policy where industry was able to freely pollute, if you like, and the government was just spending more and more taxpayers' money to offset it, that would become a very expensive charge on the budget in the years ahead.
Are you then envious of your Conservative colleagues in the British government who yesterday signed up to a carbon emissions reduction target of 50% of 1990 levels by 2027? 50%, 10 times what you and the government have signed up to.
Well, it is the British Conservative Party has got a very different